right at this very moment, while you're watching this video. There are American warships navigating a water corridor that is 34 kilometers wide at its narrowest point. Through this very same corridor passes roughly 20% of all the oil and liquefied natural gas the world consumes. And on the upper side of this corridor, Iran has missile systems pointed downwards, from positions that didn't even exist 2 years ago. Pentagon planners have been quietly asking a question for months, and it's become urgent in the last 6. What does it take to make an aircraft carrier useless without sinking it? It's not a rhetorical question. It's not a theoretical exercise in military strategy. It's a practical issue, with an answer that is being built right now, piece by piece, missile by missile, deal by deal, in the Strait of Hormuz. And the answer involves China, Iran, Russia, and one specific weapon that fills the final gap in a strategy that took decades to build. The Strait of Hormuz is 34 kilometers wide at its narrowest point. The distance between the Iranian coast to the north and the Omani coast to the south. The internationally recognized shipping lanes are only 10 kilometers wide in each direction. 2 corridors of 5 kilometers each, with two-way traffic of some of the largest ships ever built. For a 300-meter oil tanker, this is operational, but tight. For an aircraft carrier strike group consisting of a 330-meter-long ship, 2 cruisers, 4 destroyers, 2 submarines, and supply ships, it's a geometry that wasn't designed for tactical combat maneuvering. Think of it this way. 10 kilometers is the width of an average city. Imagine maneuvering a combat formation of 8 ships down an avenue with firing positions in every window on both sides. There's no room to escape out of someone's range. There is no direction that isn't covered by at least one set of land-based positions. The average depth of the strait is 60 meters, enough for surface ships, but insufficient for any comfortable margin of anti-submarine operation. The shores are controlled by Iran to the north and by Oman to the south. Oman is not a threat. Iran has 1,500 kilometers of coastline along the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz. There's no alternative route. The Suez Canal can't absorb this volume of traffic. The Cape of Good Hope adds weeks of travel time and doubles the cost. The overland pipeline? Its capacity doesn't come close to the maritime volume. For Persian Gulf oil to reach the world, it has to pass through that 10-kilometer corridor. Here's what a choke point really means. There's no way around it. Whoever controls both sides of a corridor this wide doesn't just control traffic, they control the threat of interrupting it. And that threat alone has enormous strategic value, even without firing a single shot. The question about the useless aircraft carrier stays open for now. The answer comes after we understand what's been built here, layer by layer, and what's being added right now. But first, what the United States has built in the Persian Gulf that's now at risk. Since the early 1990s, the U.S. Fifth Fleet has operated out of Manama, Bahrain. It's the permanent U.S. naval base in the Persian Gulf, and its existence has been, for decades, the most important factor in regional geopolitics. The fleet controls access to the Persian Gulf, the Red Sea, the Gulf of Oman, and the northern Indian Ocean. It represents the projection of American power in one of the most strategic regions on the planet. An American aircraft carrier strike group isn't just a big ship. It's an integrated system of power projected at a distance. The aircraft carrier itself carries between 65 and 90 aircraft, FA-18 fighters, Growler electronic warfare aircraft, helicopters, and early warning aircraft. Operating around it are Ticonderoga-class cruisers equipped with the Aegis system, the most sophisticated naval air defense system in existence. Arleigh Burke-class destroyers form the outer perimeter, each capable of launching over 90 missiles of various types. Virginia-class attack submarines operate invisibly. Supply ships guarantee operational autonomy for months without returning to base. When this formation sailed through the Strait of Hormuz during the 2000s and 2010s, the strategic effect was immediate and calculated. Iran knew what it was looking at. It knew what it meant to have 70 armed aircraft less than 500 kilometers from its capital. It knew what it meant to have Tomahawk missiles aimed at its military infrastructure from ships sailing just 40 kilometers off its coast. This didn't stop provocations. The Revolutionary Guard kept harassing commercial shipping, capturing sailors in maritime border disputes, and launching drones at targets. But there was a line Iran wouldn't cross. No direct confrontation with the US Navy that could mean open war. The reason was simple. In a high-intensity conventional war, the outcome wasn't in doubt. the US Navy would destroy Iranian naval power in days. This equation lasted for decades. What's happening now is Iran, with Chinese backing, rewriting it. Not by building a navy equivalent to the American one that'd take generations, but by making the American presence in the strait too expensive to sustain in a conflict. To understand how, we need to understand what Iran already had before any deal with Beijing. There is a detail that most analyses of the CM-302 ignore. The problem of the Strait of Hormuz didn't start with China. It was built by Iran, patiently, over decades. China is not creating a threat from scratch. It is closing the final gap in a strategy that was already quite advanced. The most cited estimate of the Iranian missile arsenal comes from Israeli intelligence assessments, validated after the 12-day war in June 2025. More than 2,500 operational ballistic and cruise missiles. The number is impressive, but what matters more than the total number is the logic behind it. Iran can't compete with the United States in high-quality conventional warfare. Fourth and fifth generation aircraft, intelligent satellites, encrypted communications, precision-guided munitions, sustainment logistics. The Americans have a generational tech advantage Iran can't match with its resources. So Iran, decades ago, chose a different strategy. Saturation over precision. Imagine what that means in practice. Not one missile, not 10. A simultaneous wave of dozens of vectors arriving from multiple directions, each forcing the defense system to make a split-second decision, and each decision consuming an interceptor that cannot be reloaded in the middle of combat. Here's the idea. If you can't guarantee one missile destroys the target, you launch many. Not because each is precise, but because the enemy's defense systems have a finite capacity. Every air defense system, no matter how sophisticated, has a ceiling, a maximum number of missiles it can track and intercept at once. Exceed that ceiling, and some get through. In a naval conflict, some getting through can change the strategic outcome. Iran operates the Shahab-3, a liquid-fueled ballistic missile with a range of 1,300 kilometers. The long-distance heavyweight. The solid-fueled Sejil, which can be prepared in minutes rather than hours. The Fateh 110 and its variants, designed for precision strikes on naval targets at short range. The long-range Sumar cruise missile. High rate of fire rocket systems. Nor anti-ship missiles, derived from the Chinese C-802. Each of these systems individually is a problem that Aegis knows how to solve. It's like a boxer trained to block punches. A right punch, a left punch, an uppercut, reflexes handle it. The Iranian problem isn't training better fighters. It's forcing the boxer to block 12 punches at once from different angles. The goal isn't surgical precision. It's overwhelming the integrated defense of an enemy strike group until intercepting everything becomes impossible. But this arsenal has a fundamental limitation any analyst following the 12-day war identified. Most Iranian systems are subsonic or moderate speed. A subsonic cruise missile traveling at 900 kilometers per hour gives naval air defense systems time to acquire, track, and intercept it. Aegis was built exactly for this, and it's very good at it. So here's the question for later. If Iran already had thousands of missiles capable of saturation, what exactly changes with the Chinese deal? Hold that thought. The answer lies in a technical spec that transforms the entire equation. But before we get to it, there's a geographical move Iran made in March 2025 that makes this answer urgent. In March 2025, satellite imagery and intelligence reports confirmed something that permanently changed the analysis of Hormuz. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps had deployed missile systems on the three disputed islands of the Persian Gulf: Greater Tunb, Lesser Tunb, and Abu Musa. These three islands have a contentious history. The United Arab Emirates claims sovereignty over them. Iran's occupied them militarily since 1971, when it filled the vacuum left by the British withdrawal from the Gulf. For over 50 years, the dispute stayed at the diplomatic level. Formal protests, stalled negotiations, a de facto situation accepted as permanent. What happened in March 2025 wasn't diplomacy. It was a unilateral military move with immediate strategic consequences. And it's precisely here that the geometry of the strait, established in the first section, starts making perfect sense. To visualize the impact, think of it this way. The missile batteries on the Iranian coast, on the mainland, already covered a large part of the strait. A missile launched from the northern coast can hit targets on the southern shipping route. But there were escape angles. There were directions from which a warship could try to increase its distance from the Iranian coast, using the kilometers of open water to gain more response time. Abu Musa is located in the south-central Persian Gulf, directly on the southern exit routes. Greater Tunb and Lesser Tunb are situated at the eastern entrance of the strait, on the Gulf of Oman side. With missile systems in these three positions added to mainland coastal coverage, the coverage geometry over the shipping lanes becomes almost total. There's no longer any exit angle outside the range of at least one launcher. A carrier strike group sailing through the strait entering or exiting eventually passes within the engagement envelope of systems from the islands. Before March 2025, there were tactical options. There were geometries a commander could exploit. Afterward, planners looking at the map saw something fundamentally different. And what Iran demonstrated with this deployment was something beyond the technical capability of the missiles. It demonstrated intent. Iran didn't wait for the Chinese deal to advance its offensive posture. It moved its pieces onto the board before having the weapon that completes the equation. This says something important about Iranian strategy. It is not reactive. It is sequential and long-term. In June 2025, something happened that most analysts thought was unlikely 5 years ago. Israel and Iran fought a direct war, the 12-day war. 12 days of deep Israeli air ops strikes on nuclear sites, missile infrastructure, Revolutionary Guard facilities, followed by Iranian retaliation with massive missile launches against Israeli territory. Drones, ballistic missiles, cruise missiles in waves lasting for days. The war ended with American and Arab mediation, with no clear winner. The ceasefire was fragile, conditions stayed contested, and none of the core issues got resolved. But what the 12-day war revealed to the world, especially to Tehran and Beijing, was more important than tactics. It showed, with real field data, how the Iranian missile arsenal actually operates, and it revealed its limitations just as clearly. Israeli defenses intercepted most of the launches. The Iron Dome handled short-range rockets. David's Sling and Arrow 2 and 3 dealt with medium and long-range ballistic missiles. American air defense in the region also pitched in. Overall, the interception rate was high, but not total. Targets got hit. Infrastructure was damaged. People died. For Iranian planners and their Chinese allies, the lesson was clear. Subsonic and medium-speed missiles can be intercepted in sufficient volume to maintain acceptable defensive protection for Israel. Saturation works, but best when incoming weapon speed exceeds the interception system's response window. The missiles that got through were, overwhelmingly, the fastest and lowest-flying ones. The conclusion in Tehran was immediate. Negotiations with Beijing over the CM-302, which until mid-2024 were a low-profile discussion within discreet diplomatic channels, became urgent. What had been a medium-term modernization purchase turned into a short-term strategic priority. The war had demonstrated what was missing, and China had exactly what was missing. This brings us to the question left open in the previous section. Why would China accept the risk of providing Iran with a weapon aimed directly at the US Navy? The answer is in the next section, because understanding the Chinese decision first requires understanding exactly what this weapon is. The CM-302 is a Chinese-made anti-ship cruise missile with a declared range of 290 kilometers and is classified as supersonic. But supersonic needs unpacking because it's the center of everything. A subsonic missile like the American Harpoon or Iranian C-802 travels at about 900 kilometers per hour below the speed of sound, roughly 1,235 kilometers per hour at sea level. For Aegis, this is manageable. The detection radar spots the missile at a long distance. The tracking system calculates trajectory. The operator or automated system approves engagement, and the interceptor launches. There's time. Not much, but enough for a multi-layered defense. The CM-302 travels at 3 to 4 times the speed of sound, between 3,700 and 4,900 kilometers per hour. A naval target 150 kilometers away has less than 2.5 minutes to detect, identify, confirm as a threat, decide to engage, launch the interceptor, and destroy the incoming missile. Under real combat conditions, with electronic warfare jamming radar, with multiple simultaneous threats, with the operational stress of active conflict, 2.5 minutes is short, very short. But speed alone isn't the deciding factor. The CM-302 combines supersonic speed with sea-skimming capability, the ability to fly at extremely low altitudes, just a few meters above the ocean. This has a direct physical consequence on detection. A naval radar's detection range is limited by Earth's curvature, the radar horizon. Think of looking across a table. A tall object appears from far away, but a low-flying object only gets visible when it's right on top of you. A missile flying at normal altitude appears on a ship's radar from dozens of kilometers away. A missile flying 5 meters above the water only crosses the radar horizon when it's already much closer, because the planet's curvature keeps it hidden until then. Combine both. Sea skimming cuts detection distance in half or more, and supersonic speed reduces transit time to less than a third of a subsonic missile. The result is an effective response window that, in some scenarios, drops below 1 minute from initial detection to impact. Now for saturation math. The Aegis system on a Ticonderoga-class cruiser stores 122 missiles in its Vertical Launch Systems VLS. An Arleigh Burke-class destroyer has 90 to 96. A typical strike group has between 400 and 600 interceptors spread across it. But these serve multiple functions: land attack with tomahawks, anti-submarine warfare, conventional air defense, and anti-ship defense. The fraction available specifically for defending against supersonic anti-ship missiles is only a portion of that total. Open-source analysis from the Center for Strategic and International Studies and publications like The War Zone suggests that against supersonic sea-skimming threats, SM-2 and SM-6 interceptors might need multiple shots per target to guarantee destruction. The engagement angle is tougher, and the time window is smaller. If correct, the number of CM-302s needed to saturate a strike group's defenses isn't in the hundreds. In a coordinated attack from multiple vectors, it could be considerably lower. This explains the 500 in the title. Iran has over 2,500 ballistic and cruise missiles total. The specific number of CM-302s in the deal isn't publicly disclosed, not confirmed in open sources. The 500 combines inference about purchase volume with the existing arsenal to represent the total threat picture. But strategically, the exact number doesn't matter. What matters is what the CM-302 adds: supersonic speed plus 290-kilometer range plus sea-skimming trajectory, launched from platforms already positioned inside the strait and on the surrounding islands. With this combination, the vulnerability exposed by the 12-day war is closed. Iran already had saturation capability. Now, with the CM-302, this saturation operates at a speed that compresses defensive response windows to a point current systems weren't designed to handle at scale. In February 2026, something happened in the Strait of Hormuz that should have gotten more attention. China, Russia, and Iran held joint naval exercises in the strait. The Maritime Security Belt 2026. Joint naval exercises between countries are routine. What makes this different is who participated, where it happened, and when. Who? China sent warships from the People's Liberation Army Navy, including destroyers with advanced missile systems. Russia sent warships from the Pacific Fleet, not observers, but active participants. Iran coordinated local forces from the conventional Navy and Revolutionary Guard. 3 nuclear or nuclear-adjacent powers conducting tactical exercises together. Where? In the Strait of Hormuz. Not the high seas of the Indian Ocean, not the China Sea. The specific corridor where the U.S. Fifth Fleet operates permanently, where the USS Gerald R. Ford was sailing, where 20% of the world's oil moves. When? Weeks after the CM-302 deal reached near finalization. At the highest U.S.-Iran military tension since 2020, with multiple U.S. aircraft carrier strike groups in the region. A joint naval exercise isn't just training, it's communication. What China is saying by holding exercises in Hormuz with Iran, by sending warships to the same strait where the U.S. Navy operates, is that the Sino-Iranian relationship isn't just commercial or diplomatic, it's strategic and operational. This answers the question from before. Why would China accept the risk of providing Iran with a weapon that threatens the U.S. Navy? China gains the formalization of a trilateral alignment that redefines the Gulf's security architecture. It's not a formal NATO-style alliance. China avoids formal commitments that limit its freedom. But the joint exercise in Hormuz signals something beyond distant observation: operational coordination, shared doctrine, and the communication of a strategic alignment any military planner in Washington can read. The American response was the USS Gerald R. Ford, the most advanced aircraft carrier in U.S. Navy history. $13 billion, 100,000 tons, the most imposing power projection asset in existence, deployed to the region in February and March 2026, sailing in a position of presence and deterrence in the Gulf. But here's the paradox: no official American statement will openly say the Ford is the most impressive power projection asset the U.S. has. It's also in a high-intensity conflict in the Strait with operational CM-302s and militarized islands, the target with the highest symbolic, strategic, and political value in those waters. The Ford's presence says, we have the capability to project power here. But it also says, here's a $13 billion ship within range of your new supersonic missiles, in a water corridor from which it can't easily maneuver out. The old playbook of American naval strategy deploying an aircraft carrier to signal resolve is being applied to a problem that existed before this playbook was written. And the issue now is answering the question from the beginning. What exactly does useless mean in this context? Go back to the question this video started with. What does it take to make an aircraft carrier useless without sinking it? The answer isn't a matter of physics, it's a matter of strategic calculation. And the calculus has changed. An aircraft carrier is never useless in absolute terms. The USS Gerald R. Ford can launch precise airstrikes on Iranian ground targets. It can provide air superiority over the Gulf. It can coordinate anti-submarine operations. It can serve as an intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance platform. It can show the flag in a way no other naval asset can. In a low-intensity conflict, a diplomatic crisis, a limited pressure operation, a calculated show of force. The Ford remains extraordinarily useful. But useless in the Strait of Hormuz context means something different. Useless for the core historical purpose that justified decades of the Fifth Fleet's presence. That purpose was ensuring Iran would never close the strait in a high-intensity conflict, maintaining the threat of total destruction of Iranian military power as a sufficient deterrent. The combat arithmetic in the strait with operational CM-302s and militarized islands works like this. Iran starts with a precursor wave: subsonic cruise missiles, drones, and electronic jamming. This wave's goal isn't necessarily destroying ships, it's forcing the Aegis system to fire interceptors, consuming part of the fleet's defensive stockpile. While the defense handles the first wave, the second arrives. Supersonic CM-302s launched simultaneously and in coordination from the three islands, the mainland coast, and possibly surface ships or submarines operating further south. Which threat do you engage first? Which do you let through? When you're intercepting a subsonic target, a CM-302 at Mach 3.5 launched from the Tuanbe Islands is 80 kilometers away and closing fast. Aegis can track both simultaneously, that's what it was designed for. But engagement decisions in a saturation environment, under electronic warfare with multiple vectors, have a real limit. Aegis was developed and extensively tested against subsonic threats and some supersonic threats. The SM-6 has limited anti-hypersonic capability, but controlled testing is different from real combat in a 10-kilometer-wide strait with simultaneous launches from multiple directions under radar jamming. Open-source analyses from the Center for Strategic and International Studies are cautious here. They don't say Aegis fails. They say confidence margins decrease significantly in supersonic saturation scenarios. In geographical terms, a CM-302 launched from Abu Musa Island, 55 kilometers from a central shipping lane, arrives in less than 45 seconds at Mach 4. The strait doesn't allow significant evasive maneuvers. It's 10 kilometers wide, not 100. Falling back out of range means leaving the strait entirely, which in active combat with Revolutionary Guard drones and bombers in the air is risky in itself. So useless means this. In a high-intensity conflict with operational CM-302s, militarized islands, and the trilateral alignment from the Maritime Security Belt 2026, keeping an aircraft carrier inside the Strait of Hormuz or nearby during combat exposes the U.S. Navy's most valuable asset to a scenario where defensive math doesn't offer the guarantees it did in 2015 or 2010. It's not impossible to defend the aircraft carrier. The U.S. Navy has capabilities not publicly revealed. But the margin of safety, the difference between most likely survives and might be damaged or worse, has shrunk dramatically. Deterrence, as always, works both ways. The U.S. deters Iran from permanently closing the strait, provoking a full American response would cost Iran its military in days, not weeks. Iran deters the U.S. from operating freely inside the strait during a conflict. The political, strategic, and symbolic cost of seeing an American aircraft carrier seriously damaged would be devastating, far beyond the ship's value. This is what strategists call the balance of terror. It's not stability, it's mutual containment based on the credible threat of unacceptable damage to both sides. And it's this balance, not a naval battle, that defines the Strait of Hormuz in March 2026. In March 2026, the CM-302 deal is nearing completion. Multiple American aircraft carrier strike groups are in the region. U.S.-Iran military tension is at its highest since Qasem Soleimani's assassination in January 2020. And the world is watching a strategic triangle, China, Russia, Iran, that 2 years ago was just analyst talk and today is documented reality in naval exercises. 3 paths are possible from here. Scenario 1. The CM-302 deal collapses. Intensified American diplomatic pressure, targeted sanctions on supply chain companies, or a shift in Beijing's cost-benefit calculus halts the process. Iran is left with its existing arsenal, significant and capable of causing serious problems, but lacking the long-range supersonic element that guarantees penetration capability. The balance of power in the strait stabilizes at a high but manageable tension level. China preserves its U.S. diplomatic relationship at the cost of delaying, not canceling, its strategic alignment with Iran. Scenario 2. The deal completes quietly. CM-302s arrive in Iran in batches over coming months and integrate into the existing arsenal. Technical training happens at Iranian bases with Chinese instructors. The Strait of Hormuz transforms, in the next conflict that erupts there, into a categorically different environment than any previous crisis. The U.S. Navy adjusts doctrine, accelerates development of next-generation interceptors like SM-3 Block 2A and laser weapons, and the balance of terror deepens with both sides more aware of each other's limits. Scenario 3. Escalation before the deal is fully operational. A Revolutionary Guard operation goes too far, a ship capture, partial blockade, an oil platform attack. An American response crosses an unplanned line, a miscalculation in an environment where both sides operate military systems just kilometers apart, in restricted waters, with maximum political tension. In this scenario, the CM-302 doesn't even need to be operational. The arsenal Iran has today 2,500 missiles, militarized islands. Launchers in the strait is already enough to turn a tactical incident into an operational confrontation that no leader in Washington or Tehran knows how to exit. Watch for these indicators in the coming weeks. Statements from China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs about American sanctions on Chinese defense or logistics companies that signals real-deal pressure. Reports from Forecast International or Janes about unusual logistical movements in Iranian Gulf of Oman ports. Statements from the UAE or Saudi Arabia about regional threat assessments. Gulf countries signal perception shifts before any official American declaration, because they're most directly exposed. The Strait of Hormuz won't close tomorrow. Iran doesn't want to close it. The Iranian economy itself, despite all sanctions, relies on maritime access to export the oil, keeping the regime running. But the difference between the strait stays open and the cost of operating in this strait during a conflict has skyrocketed for the U.S. Navy is massive. And it's in this space, this gap between formal openness and actual operational freedom, that the Hormuz trap is working. The trap doesn't work through destruction, it works through the convincing threat of unacceptable cost. And right now, in March 2026, that threat has never been more credible. The signs are visible if you know where to look. Beijing's statements on sanctions against supply chain companies, logistical movements in Iranian Gulf of Oman ports, and statements from the UAE and Saudi Arabia that usually anticipate Washington weeks later. If you want to keep tracking these indicators and what they reveal about the Strait of Hormuz's next chapter, subscribe to the channel. The balance of terror described in this video doesn't end here. It's being rewritten in real time.